I like to be as blunt and opinionated as I can be. I caveat it as well by saying these are my convictions. This is what I see as the truth. It is not the philosophical definition of truth. We're all speculating together on a lot of these things, but I like to back up my opinions with as much evidence as I can. We're not going to have time to stovepipe all the facts and data and all the graphs because I thought we'd have more time. But look, all of us are here for similar reasons with similar questions about what do we do in this era? Something feels off. That's not an existential kind of angst. It's just we've just come through some weird times with policies in North America and Europe that we can debate, agree on, disagree on, about our personal liberties. We have concerns about our currency, about our banking system, about our political climate, our debate, the weaponization of science, the weaponization of the media, the trust or distrust, whatever your leanings are. But these are concerns. And everywhere I travel, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in the US, North Continent, South Continents in the US, South America, it's amazing how many people are asking me, so what are you thinking? Where are you going? As if there's some Shangri-La we can find an answer to or some zip code that's going to have all the answers for the concerns, and there just isn't. So there's a lot of fog. I want to talk about America, not because I'm an American. I should also just say, just for context, I am American. I grew up on apple pie and baseball, and I got scholarships to great schools, but I have this weird background. German father, a French wife, educated a little bit in Germany, educated in the US, moved back to Europe. My kids were raised in France and in the US, and then I live in the south of France but work in Switzerland. So I have this kind of multi-perspective on things. But I talk about America not just because I'm an American, but because America is the home of the world reserve currency. It is the home of the US Federal Reserve. Its policies do impact all the great central banks. There really are two bond markets, the one in the US and the one outside of the US. So when you have theories about the US policy, it's not just because I'm an American with an American-centric view on risk assets or currencies or interest rate policies, but because it really does affect the world. And when I look at the America today, I look at the global financial picture, and again, I can't see all of it, but those images really talk about heroes and anti-heroes. And I have the picture of the Anzacs, the Gallipoli, and the Canadians, and the Australians, and the New Zealanders, these brave men who kind of fought the good fight in the First World War, and then the RAF in the Second World War, and these young guys in their 20s going out to fight the Luftwaffe and protect Britain from the Germans in the Battle of Britain. And then I look at guys that are the new heroes, the Adam Newmans of the world, the Theranoses of the world, the young, kind of hip, arrogant class of multimillionaires who really haven't done much for the world but have done a lot for their own balance sheets. And the value systems today of what we consider a success, or what we consider heroic, I think is very upside down. And then, of course, I know I'm obviously making a little elder abuse fun of Biden. I'm not here to take a partisan view. I have a problem with Joe Biden, not because of his politics. I have a problem that's very clear to everyone in the world, in America, outside of America, that he's not the only one making decisions in the White House. That should be fairly clear without being conspiracy theory or debated, and that should raise eyebrows and concerns as we get into other themes. So there's a lot of images there that kind of talk about the current issue. A lot of it's political, some of it's psychological, some of it's just downright dishonest and frankly corrupt. You look at some of those figures, and the contrast between the Adam Newmans and the Sam Bankman-Frieds and the Theranos executives and this other great generation. Of course, that's very romantic and easy to say, but there is a palpable difference to the type of people that we look up to today and the type of people we've kind of forgotten about. And those values may sound esoteric and vague, but they still matter to a lot of us. That's why a lot of us are asking, what do we do? What do we do in these times? I look at how we got here. Everything starts with this theme. And again, I'm trying to get through 40 slides in 20 minutes, and I won't get into all the weeds, but debt clearly is a problem. Our debt levels are massive. Our income levels relative to our debt are insulting. Our tax revenues relative to our debt levels are insulting. America, like so many other countries in the world, is living well beyond its means. Like like a spoiled frat boy with his dad's credit card, trying to buy popularity, pushing off the bill payment until somebody else has to be stuck with it. And in the meantime, kind of with excuses. There's some numbers at the bottom that I think are very important, and I don't have all of them in front of me, but I know what they are in the back of my head. 120, well, that's 120% debt to GDP. Again, these aren't academic numbers. America has 120% debt to GDP. It has an 8% deficit to GDP, which is, assuming no recession in the future, that number could get higher. These are not just academic numbers I throw out to show how clever I am, but these are absolutely essential to our daily lives and the daily lives of American debt. We have a negative 65% net international investment position. That just means that America doesn't really have a piggy bank of assets outside of its own borders. Its problems are internal, its debt problems are internal, its consequences affect the whole world. Again, can't see all the numbers, but I think I probably got a number like 34 in there, 34 trillion in public debt, over 100 trillion in government, household, and corporate debt in America. That is an abstraction. It's a banality of numbers. It's hard to conceive of what that even means. It's obviously never going to be repaid. And the other number there is I have 20 and 10. The Congressional Budget Office in the US is projecting another $20 trillion in IOU issuance in the next 10 years. So we're already at 34 trillion and counting. We got there very fast. Another 20 trillion more IOUs to be issued over the next 10 years. These numbers are simply unsustainable. And again, that goes to the rotten wing beneath the American dream post-Bretton Woods, post-1971. This is how America has changed. We are literally a drunken sailor economy with the facade of the great buildings and the great stories of Washington, D.C. The Capitol building is still beautiful. The Federal Reserve, which isn't even Federal Reserve, frankly, is the fourth branch of government. We have the Department of Treasury. We have these beautiful buildings, the Justice Department. But what's inside and what's beneath these beautiful buildings is not the ideals of our founding fathers. And these are the ripple effects of debt. Everything we would want to talk about if we had more time, and I wish I did, if you're looking at currencies, the currency debate is an important debate. If you're looking at the bond market, if you're looking at geopolitics, if you're talking about cryptocurrencies, if you're talking about precious metals, all of these themes are ramifications of debt levels that have just become absurd, openly absurd, that is not discussed enough in the media. It's what is not discussed in the media that is not a conspiracy theory. It's not kooky to understand the balance sheet of your country and have it discussed openly. We all do it with our wives or partners or family at home. I joke about this, but it's not a joke. Whether you're in the top 10% or the bottom 10%, every member of every family has to sit down and decide what's our income, what's our obligations, what do we have to do to tighten our belt or to loosen our belt? It's just based on common sense. That shouldn't be a hard discussion for the government to have with its people. It should be transparent and it should be accountable. It's not even on the headlines. We are lost in this Zerrissenheit, I would say, of Deutsch, just looking in every direction but at the simple facts. And it all comes from debt. Again, I can't see this screen. I'm sorry, guys. I wish I could see it. But those are pictures of the guy on the top is a famous picture from the post-French Revolution in the 1780s when the guillotines were out in Paris and the National Assembly was trying to figure out what to do. They had these great ideas in their National Assembly, very similar to the modern monetary theories we've seen in the last 8 to 10 years. And the idea is, look, we can just print money. It's not a problem. We'll just print assignats. And, but one of them, a guy named Necker, who was the version of Bernanke at the time, said, well, only for a little while, because if we do that, there's going to be consequences. But, you know, what's funny is that was a palpably good idea, they thought, in the French in the 1780s. And that's exactly what MMT theorists like Mosler are saying. We can print money without consequences. That's not going to affect our currency. It's not going to affect the dilution effect or debase our money, because it all works out. And again, if we had more time, I'd explain his theory. And there's a quote under there by Mark Twain. I can't read it. You can read it for yourself. But it's sometimes hard to imagine these guys take themselves seriously with these fictions. Okay, what's wrong? Centralized markets, dying capitalism, modern feudalism. That sounds really dramatic. Man, here's another gold bug selling this fear theory, selling drama and sensational. Folks, you don't have to be sensational to see how obviously Pavlovian the US stock markets are with the Federal Reserve. If the Fed is hawkish or if the Fed is dovish, the markets are going to be bearish or they're going to be bullish. It's a switch. It's not even a thermostat anymore. The markets follow Fed policy. And what we have, because the Fed policies, when they have a zero bond interest rate policy for years and they reverse it with a higher interest rate policy, what we've done is we've created a massive asset bubble in the risk assets, stocks and bonds. In America, this is not an exaggeration or me trying to sell fear, 90% of the risk asset bubble growth has benefited the top 10% of America. That includes me. That's not healthy for America when the top 10% have 90% of the wealth. And that's why I see this isn't capitalism. This is a centralized stock market, literally a centralized asset bubble, which has benefited a small minority of hedge fund guys like myself who know how the game is played. And what does that mean? We have an America that isn't capitalism, it's centralization. And I do think it's serfs and lords. I am a capitalist to the core, but the type of income that Amazon has made. And I went to law school. I studied the Clayton Act. I studied the Sherman Act. There were things called antitrust principles that no one entity or company had that kind of power. That marriage of massive power and government is the definition of centralization. Frankly, it's the definition of fascism, but I know that's a sensational term. When my grandfather was an executive at Ford and I had my silver spoon inheritance, the average ratio from a manager to an employee was 32 to 1. That was in the 40s, in the heyday of the Ford era. By the 70s, it was 320 to 1. In Bezos' time, it's 1.2 million to 1 is what he charges himself in salary compared to his average employee. Again, I'm a capitalist. There's something psychopathic about that kind of money, and there's frankly something about vertical integration of Amazon, not to mention Google, Facebook, and the other fabulous seven, that violates everything I learned in law school about sound antitrust principles and monopoly powers. These are robber barons, not capitalists. There's something wrong in our capitalism, and I am a capitalist. But this is why these jackals at Davos and other places can claim that socialism is a better alternative, because our capitalism isn't capitalism right now. It's already distorted beyond recognition. And that, again, is not sensational. It should be discussed more openly without being labeled a conspiracy theorist or an anti-American or a domestic terrorist just because we don't have capitalism. We don't have a judicial system that works. We don't have an antitrust system that works. We have an SEC that turns its blind eye to blatant violations of the principles of supply and demand. Again, I would love to spend more time on this, but again, what's wrong? Well, in addition to debt and loss of values and a dying sense of capitalism, a rising sense of feudalism, we have a weaponized currency, a very, very bad idea. I am not here to talk about whether Zelensky's the next George Washington or Putin is Hitler 2.0. I'm not here to get into a debate about that war, but I do know it was a bad idea to weaponize the US dollar against Putin, whatever you think of him. That's not a political bias, it's common sense. John Maynard Keynes said, don't weaponize the neutral reserve currency, that's going to be bad. Robert Triffin said that in our Congress. Barack Obama even said it. So why did Biden make the decision after Obama, his boss, said don't do this? Because the real issue is who really made the decision. Again, this goes into a much longer stovepipe about who's in charge in Washington, D.C. And if I had an hour and not 20 minutes, I'd tell you more about what we know. Again, not discussed. But it is very alarming that we don't really know who's making these decisions. So weaponization of the US dollar was a big mistake. For a lot of reasons, it sent Russia and China and the rest of the world to look a little bit outside the US dollar. It's not the end of the US dollar, we'll get into that, but it was a big mistake. Condoleezza Rice said in 2014, don't worry, Russia will run out of money before the West runs out of energy. That was absolutely not true. And as someone who lives in Europe and spends a lot of time in Germany where they're burning coal right now and going into a recession, that's just not true. That was a bald-faced lie or a complete misunderstanding of geopolitics and the energy crisis in Europe. What's wrong again? The debate. Another thing, we're having this big debate right now about hard versus soft landing. My God, the evidence is overwhelming that we are already in a hard landing. It's not even a debate about a Goldilocks scenario. And I use these evidence every time you raise rates. It always leads to a recession. And there's a whole list of examples down there. I don't have the time to go into chart by chart. I know I wish you're going to have to take my word for it. And you could double check this. But look, whether you look at the M2 money supply, whether you look at the Conference Board of Leading Indicators, whether you look at the Oliver Anthony song in Farmville, Virginia, that's got 100 million hits in less than 4 months because he's singing out loud about the dying middle class, whether you're looking at grassroots evidence or Wall Street's own indicators, M2 money supply, the Conference Board of Leading Indicators, the inverted yield curve, we are already in a recession. We are already in a hard landing. The fact that we're still debating this means that the Fed and the politicos want to keep us distracted with nice words, to basically lofty words to hide really empirically, obviously bad math. And again, maybe for those of you in the top 10%, or the top 1%, it hurts a little to see markets vacillate, go up and down, you feel richer or poor. If you're in the middle class, there's no debate whether you're in a hard landing. When inflation, however it's reported, is eating away at your assets, when you're getting taxed to no end and your currency ain't worth X, as the song says. So again, from Main Street to Wall Street, the evidence of a recession or a hard landing is already here. And I, again, wish we had more time. What's another problem with the current era? The death of honesty. All these quotes on here I was going to spend time with, these are each experts who told us never to worry about another recession again, or that printing money would have no effect on inflation, or that inflation would be temporary, or Nixon, when we went off the gold standard, that this would not affect the US dollar, and that would only be temporary. That was over 50 years ago. We still don't have a gold standard, and the US dollar has lost 98% of its value vis-a-vis gold since 1971. So I don't think anything those quote-unquote experts, our financial elite, our leaders say, is empirically fact-checked the truth. And yet they are still in charge of the decisions. We still look up to them to lead us out of this. That's not anti-American, it's just accountability. Should be the same thing in Canada, should be the same thing in the European Union. More and more of the same thing. False values, false leaders, false heroes. Again, I could spend 20 minutes on each of the men and women in these pictures and talk about the absolute lack of integrity and how these people at one point were considered heroes. What, because they had money? Is that the definition of success? How many zeros are in your bank account? It's not a safe bet. The psychology of a guy like Klaus Schwab would be fun. It would be equally fun to do Bernanke. Even more fun to do Greenspan. Literally, it'd be a great course just on looking at Greenspan's personality and what that's done to the world. Or just the Nobel Prize to Bernanke. It's fascinating stuff. Klaus Schwab, boy, that's a whole other movie. And again, not sensational. We all know this not because we're conspiracy theorists, because we have common sense and a small amount of curiosity to look at the facts underneath the stories. That's it. That's it. And it shouldn't be this crazy to have to say this stuff out loud. But here we are. Other problems. Well, this is, again, I wanted to spend a lot of time on the examples of what we're seeing of centralization, authoritarian kind of trends. And again, I'm running out of time here. I really wish I had more time. But here's something I want you to keep in your mind. I've studied financial crises from the ancient Rome back to the Ming Dynasty, the Weimar regime, South American regimes, Latin and Cuba, all the way to 1990 Yugoslavia. Here's what happens every time, ohne Ausnahme, as we say auf Deutsch, without exception. You have a debt crisis, whether it's an empire, a democracy, a regime, a monarchy. You have a debt crisis that is always followed by a market crisis, which is always followed by a currency crisis and inflation, every time. Because they have to debate their currency to pay for their debts. And every time there's a currency crisis, there is always social unrest. Again, ancient Rome to the 1930s in Mussolini's Italy, or Adolf Hitler's Weimar Germany, post facto. And today, you have a debt crisis, you have an inflation crisis, you have social unrest, and then you have what always follows, and this is the scary part, extreme political control from the left or the right. Bolshevism, fascism in the past, what is it today? The benevolent new democracy. Again, we all see different examples of this in different parts of the world, but it's usually masquerading as something for your best interests or for national security when it's really just desperate trying to control you. And the evidence of that control isn't just CBDC, which is egregious enough. It isn't just the debate on the weaponization of science or the censorship of alternative views from Great Barrington to CNN. It isn't just the power that Google and Facebook and these tech companies have over our lives. Those are just the tip of the iceberg. Again, I really wish we had more time, but the scariest part is after all those things happen, centralization, an opportunist comes in. A Klaus Schwab, a Napoleon, a Mussolini, a Castro. They always come in promising results. What are they doing? They're getting more control, and you're the sheep. And they say it's for your own good. This isn't even about gold or currencies. This is just about history. And again, it may sound like a conspiracy theory. It's extremely dangerous. I'm going to try and go a couple more minutes because we really aren't getting as fast as I want. Who to blame and how we got there? We had great values once, our founding fathers, at least in the US. We had great principles about separation of government, 3 branches of government, a legislative, an executive, and a judicial. We had ideas about what is good or bad money, what is a central bank, whether we should have one, who should coin our currency, who should produce our currency. It wasn't supposed to be a central bank that has the control of the supply and cost of our money. Thomas Jefferson said that'd be like having a foreign army on our shores. It'd be more dangerous to have a Fed. He'd rather have a foreign army on our shores. President Jackson, Andrew Jackson, said 30 years later, the central bank, a private central bank, a private central bank is the prostitution of our government for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many, because it just creates asset bubbles that the top 10% get to benefit from, while the middle class is the plankton for the Wall Street whales. That sounds sensational. It's not. And what I also wanted to get into, is I'm running out of time, is what they have done to our currency since we welched on the gold standard in 1971. We have created trillions of money out of thin air, and they said that has no effect on the currency. That has no effect on the status quo of our society or the wealth inequality of our society. That is an open lie. If anyone with common sense took a good glass of wine and I poured buckets of water into that wine, would that wine still be as strong? obviously it's been diluted. Do you think you can print trillions and trillions of dollars over the years and not have an effect on your currency? And that explains why the US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. And again, folks, my fault because I prepared way too many slides. But again, I go into this with example after example. This is just a simple example of human nature. John Kennedy, Profiles in Courage, he tried to write a book about politicians who actually cared about their country, not about getting reelected, who actually felt compelled to run for office because they were worried about their country, not about their legacy, their income, or their reputation. Nietzsche talked about these type of people too. They hardly exist because most politicians have a will to power that would make Nietzsche blush. And again, same thing with Thomas Paine, a great Virginian patriot. It's almost impossible to find an honest man in Parliament or an honest man in Congress. It doesn't mean they're impossible, they're just very hard to find. So a big problem is human nature. Anyway, guys, I'm getting blown off here because I'm going over time, and that's my fault. I can meet you in the back and ask more questions. What I really wanted to get to, of course, at the end is, look, our currencies are getting debased, our values are getting debased, our politics are getting weaponized. We have to think about how to protect ourselves from that. I don't have all the answers, but in terms of currency, physical gold, your central banks aren't going to back up your currency with physical gold. You have to do it yourself. Yes, that's a gold bug argument. Yes, I have a bias. Yes, I sell gold for high net worth individuals in Zurich. Yes, I'm a high net former hedge fund guy. Yes, I have strong convictions about gold. And yes, I'm biased. That doesn't mean I'm selling you nonsense. I'm telling you what I think. That's it. That's all I can be.